Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another election prediction. This time, we're going to be covering the 2024 Senate map in the month of May 2024. So, just a few more months until the election. So, going into this, I'm just going to fill out a bunch of the safe states already. These states don't really deserve or need an explanation because they're just extremely obvious. I mean, Nebraska, only one poll there, and even then it was sponsored by the Independence campaign, so it really isn't that reliable. West Virginia, it's an automatic flip for Republicans because Joe Manchin isn't running here for re-election. No other Democrat really stands a chance there except for him. And I think we still have to do some safe states. Yep. New Jersey, I don't think Bob Menendez is going to survive that trial. I think it's definitely probably going to convict him this time because it's just so blatant at this point. And I don't think he's going to run for it as an independent anyway. I think his political career is over. New Mexico, it's safe Democratic. I don't see Republicans really putting much resources here either. Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar frequently wins by landslide margins in the state of Minnesota, so I expect her to do that yet again. In Virginia, with Tim Kaine, he usually outperforms other people on the ballot here. So even if Hung Kao is the nominee, and he did overperform in that one House race, a House race is different than a Senate race. And with Tim Kaine having a pretty good favorability rating in his past of overperforming, I think he's definitely going to overperform Joe Biden come the election. I just don't see Hung Kao making it close. The only guy who could make this race close is Glenn Youngkin, and even then, I still think Tim Kaine beats him just because he's a very strong candidate. So I still have Virginia as a safe Democratic state. So let's just get right into it. Starting off with the state of Florida. Rick Scott, even though he's doesn't have the best approval rating. It's Florida. It's still just trending Republican off a cliff for Republicans at this point. And Trump, he's probably going to do pretty well in Florida. He's probably going to win the state by like 9 points or something like that. So that's definitely going to have a down ballot drag for Rick Scott to drag him over that likely margin of victory in the state of Florida. So I think he probably ends up winning by about 7% against the Democratic candidate. I don't think they really have a shot here just because of how Republican trending Florida is. Going on with Texas, I think Ted Cruz, he learned a lesson in 2018. He learned that he can't coast by to an easy victory here because that election spooked him, and now he's done a lot more outreach in the state. He's focused a lot more on campaigning here. And so far in the polls, let's just go back. I was looking at Maryland's Senate race because that's actually quite interesting. But again, in most of these polls, he's leading by around 5-6 points or so. I expect him to probably end up winning here by about 5 percentage points against Colin Allred. Allred will do well for a Democrat. He would give a good amount of a boost to Democrats in the urban areas, but it's not enough to outweigh Texas's Republican lean at this point. So I still have Texas as a likely Republican state. Moving on to the state of Maryland, and I was just looking at the race just before I was making this video, and you could see these polls here. Now, we already know that Trone, he's a stronger candidate than also Brooks, but also Brooks, she's got a wave of endorsements recently. So, again, she has a lot of momentum going her way. You could just take a look at this endorsement list here. I really think she's going to be the Democratic nominee here. And with David Trone messing up in that hearing, I think a lot of black voters are going to end up going to also Brooks. And again, Maryland, you need black voters to win a primary here in this state. And looking at this list here, even the governor endorsed her. So I think she has a lot of momentum going her way. And even though she's not leading the primary polls yet, I thought we're going to see some polls putting her in the lead, and I do expect her to actually end up winning the primary. The reason why I'm talking about that is she is a weaker candidate, just based on the polling here, because Trone's self-funding his campaign, so of course that's going to give him a bit of a boost at the end of the day. But the thing is, Hogan, in some polls he's pulling above 50%, and that's pretty good for him, because that means also Brooks is going to have to get some people from Hogan's camp to swap sides here, which I think is actually quite doable, honestly. The reason I say that is Maryland's a D+30 state, and we could go back to the 2018 Senate election in Tennessee. Phil Bredesen, parallel to Larry Hogan, he was a very popular governor in his state. He still ended up losing by 10 percentage points. And early on in the race, he was also leading, even in the 50s in some polls early on. As late as September, he was leading in some polls at 50 to 51%. So early on in the race, he had a lead like Hogan. But eventually, Marsha Blackburn, she caught up because the partisan lean of the state just factored in here. A lot of those Republicans supporting Phil Bredesen just ended up supporting Blackburn because they just saw Bredesen probably going to be allying with Senate Democrats in the Senate, and they just didn't want to give Democrats control of the Senate in Tennessee, mainly because of the Supreme Court confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh back then, just hurting Democrats in a lot of red states. So again, in Maryland, they cite that one of their top issues is the Democrats controlling the Senate. That's important to them. So I really think that with Hogan going to be caucusing with Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate, I think that's what's going to pretty much defeat him in the 2024 Senate race here in Maryland. I don't expect him to win, and I think we're going to see this lead start to diminish over time. Probably by September, we're going to see Alsobrooks start leading the polls, and I expect her, like Marsha Blackburn, to end up winning here by about a likely blue margin. But I do think Hogan will probably at least hold her down to at least a 7% win in the state of Maryland. I think she ends up winning here by about 7. So he'll do very well for a Republican here. Probably better than any Republican could ever do here. But if he's still leading by September, then I'll be able to change my rating. Because then it's like, wow, he might actually have a chance at winning. But I think that's just going to diminish over time. I don't expect him to keep that competitive margin in Maryland for long. Because like we saw, partisan lean of a state eventually kicks in. And with Tennessee was a R plus 23 state back in 2018, and Maryland's D plus 30 in 2024. Again, that's just such an overwhelming lean that it's going to go back to that margin here. And he isn't an incumbent either, Hogan, so he doesn't have that incumbency advantage, which would definitely help you in a state like this, which is just so Democratic leaning that, yeah. But anyway, I just don't see him winning still, but he'll make it very competitive. All right, moving on to the state of Pennsylvania. Bob Casey, he continues to lead quite decently in the polls, and I'm not really shocked at that result. Again, he's running against McCormick, and already McCormick is not the best candidate. He's definitely going to be pinned as a out-of-state resident here because he is from Connecticut, so that usually works in Pennsylvania, like we saw with Fetterman labeling Dr. Oz from New Jersey. That just regional awareness there just worked against that candidate. But I think McCormick, he'll at least keep it within the likely blue margin. I think Casey ends up winning here by about 7% against him. Okay, now we're into the more competitive races on this map. I think we'll start off with Wisconsin first, because that's actually quite interesting. An MU Law poll actually showed a very close race for the Senate race in Wisconsin. Let me just scroll down to the polling here. Yeah, it showed it as tied among likely voters, but among registered, she leads by 5. But every other poll shows her with a decent, 3-point lead. So I think she ends up winning here by about 3 percentage points. Again, Eric Hope, he's not a terrible candidate for the state of Wisconsin. But again, Wisconsin loves their incumbents. And Tammy Baldwin, she has a higher approval rating than Ron Johnson, who's managed to survive in 2022. I think just due to her incumbency advantage and Wisconsin loving to keep their incumbents here as of recently, I think she's going to manage to hold on in the state of Wisconsin still. Michigan, however, it's very competitive like it is in the presidential race. It's also extremely competitive in the Senate race. Mike Rogers, he's a pretty decent candidate. He's a former congressman in this state. So he at least has some elected experience here, and he's keeping the race close. Alyssa Slotkin only leads by 2 percentage points in most of these polls. So, again, with so many undecideds and it being a very close presidential race, I think whoever really wins the presidential race in Michigan will probably end up helping down ballot with their Senate race here. So, like the presidential race, I'm keeping this as a tilt blue state in the state of Michigan. I think Slotkin narrowly wins here. She doesn't have an incumbency advantage like Baldwin and Casey in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So she really has to work for that Senate seat, but I think she'll manage to narrowly win it. So moving on to the state of Arizona with Ruben Gallego and Kari Lake here. I think Gallego's quite favored to win still. I mean, Kari Lake, she only leads in polls that are pretty much done by internal polling here. So, again, even Rasmussen doesn't show her with that big of a lead. It's only 3 percentage points. But I think Gallego is quite favored here. Kari Lake's unfavorables are just too low to really have, or too high to really have a chance at winning in the state of Arizona. I don't think she's going to do well in Maricopa County, and she even lost back in 2022 to a person who didn't even want to debate her. So I think that kind of just shows how weak of a candidate she is. So I think Ruben Gallego is going to outperform Joe Biden in the state of Arizona and win that Senate seat. Moving on to the state of Nevada, I will say the Republican candidate here is probably an upgrade from Laxalt back in 2022. Sam Brown, he is a U.S. Army veteran, so I do think he could probably do quite well here. I think he's very favored to win. Yeah, he's definitely winning the primary. It's not going to be close. He also raised quite a bit of money on his side here. So going into this race, she pretty much leads in every single poll here by a pretty decent margin. So Trump needs to win Nevada by like 2 to 3 points here to help Sam Brown win in this state. So I think Jackie Rosen's also going to outperform Joe Biden here. She does have incumbency advantage, and she is doing well in terms of money. I think she's raised quite a bit here. If I could find the fundraising results. Yep, $13 million on hand. We could take a look at his fundraising. Again, he's going to get outraised here as we're looking at these early numbers. So I have this as a lean blue Senate race. So I think she ends up winning here by about, I would say, about 3 points or so. Gallego probably ends up winning by about 3 points as well, I would say. Or maybe 2 points. I think 3. I would just put it both at 3. So now we're going to take a look at Ohio and Montana. Now, here's my take on these races. With Ohio, Moreno still has not led in a single poll as the time I'm recording this in the beginning of May. So he still has not led in a single poll here. He did outperform the polls in the Republican primary race, but that was mainly because Trump endorsed him, and on the same day there was a Ohio presidential primary, and Haley already dropped out of the race, so that of course would boost a lot of support for the Trump-endorsed candidate here. But again, Moreno is frequently the weakest candidate in terms of polling. Every other Republican candidate was usually polling a bit better than him here in the Ohio Senate race. But the thing is, Sherrod Brown, he isn't over 50%. So it's possible that all these undecideds end up going to Moreno. So I think a lot of them, probably the majority, end up going to Moreno. It's still a very Republican state. Trump's probably going to win here by about 10 percentage points. But it is showing that it's willing the ticket split. What I mean by that is, in the polls, Trump's leading by 10 or 11 points. Sherrod Brown's leading in those same polls with that same electorate. So Sherrod Brown, he is getting a lot of ticket split support here in the state of Ohio. He's outperforming Joe Biden by a pretty good margin here. So all he needs is a little bit of those undecideds to go to his camp to get over 50%. So if a poll shows Moreno up with the lead, I'll change my mind on this race. But so far, Brown has consistently led in this race. I'm pretty sure he's doing better in terms of fundraising. He has $14 million on hand. Let's check Moreno's campaign. And it looks like Brown's probably going to outspend him here as well. So he has the money advantage too. And he has incumbency advantage. And looks like he's winning enough ticket splitters to have a chance in winning in Ohio. So I think Brown's a slight favorite to win here as well. I think he probably ends up winning by under 1%. Moving on to the state of Montana. Let's just get it up here to take a look at the recent polls. So there hasn't been a ton of polling here, like in Ohio, but with the polls we do see, GL Partners, it's typically a Republican pollster. Typically Republicans pay them to do internal polling of the race. But the other pollsters who are typically not biased, Emerson College Survey USA, they show Jon Tester up here with a decent 2 to even 9% lead here. I think the 9% is a bit of an outlier, honestly. I don't think Tester's going to get close to winning that margin. But still, Tester, he is showing a lot of adversity here. He is winning enough ticket splitters to have a real chance in the state of Montana. He has a very high approval rating here. He's one of the more popular Senate Democrats. So I do think he has a pretty good chance here in the ticket splitting state of Montana. It's only an R plus 16 state as well. It's not as Republican as you would think for being a safe Republican state. So I think Tester has a real shot at winning. We could just take a look at the fundraising too. He has $11 million on hand. Let's just take a look at the Republicans' funding. And Tim Sheehy, he's looking like he's going to be outraised here unless the RNC gets involved, which they probably will, honestly. I think they will put resources into this race, and I think they have to because this seat's probably the 51st seat for them for the Senate. So I think this helps them get that Senate control guaranteed. So I think they're going to be targeting this race pretty heavily, but early signs point to Tester narrowly holding on here in this R plus 16 state. So until more polls come out here in this race, like besides one pollster showing Sheehy with a lead, then I'll change my mind on this race. But so far, I think Tester's just narrowly favored here to win here by a under 1% margin. So there's 3 states that are decided by a tilt Republican margin, and Republicans could have a path at winning all 3 of them if Trump wins the election. They could win in Montana, they could win in Ohio, and they could win in Michigan, and they could get to 53 Senate seats. It's very doable for them. So right now, Democrats are just getting lucky enough to just barely win in these 3 states so far, according to the polls and according to the fundraising numbers. But, yeah, I would say the Republicans have a better chance at actually taking the Senate here. Even though I have the Democrats holding it and assuming Biden wins the presidency, they get the Senate, I think the Republicans have a much better odds at taking the Senate than the Democrats do. I would give the Republicans a 60% chance here at winning. So probability-wise, all it takes is them to win a tilt state, and that's quite doable here. Democrats have to sweep the board in Ohio, Michigan, and Montana. They have to get lucky in all 3 of them. So I still think the Republicans are the odds-on favorites to win the Senate. Just current individual Senate races, looking at them as an individual level, Democrats are just doing barely enough to get by in these 3 states. But they are lucky that they have incumbents in Montana and Ohio, because if they didn't have those incumbents, they would be easy Republican flips, like West Virginia. These would probably both go likely Republican if they didn't have incumbents here. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you're new to this channel, I'd highly recommend subscribing if you haven't already. If you agree or disagree with this video, let me know in the comments down below. And let me know what your own Senate predictions are. I'm interested in hearing about them. So feel free to comment whatever you want down there. And I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.